John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles Insider covers the league nationally. Read his national column at FanRag Sports NFL. Follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. And his appearance on the show is brought to you by Gino, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Visit Gino Pinto on the White Horse Pike in Hamilton, online at GinoPinto.com. Gino, the winemaker's choice for 50 years. Johnny Mack is back with a brand new edition, and he's got a bunch of Eagles news and notes here, including the return of number 41 on the practice field today, Ronald Darby. And a lot of people said 4 to 6 weeks. John, this would be week 7. He got injured in week 1. By my math, this is 6 weeks later. So, your thoughts on Ronald Darby's availability for Sunday? Or Monday, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, it's up in the air, as Doug cautioned, but he's back on the practice field, so that's a positive first step. But there's conditioning aspects to it. He's got to feel comfortable coming off the injury. Remember, it's a dislocated ankle for a guy who runs a 4.3. So you kind of need your legs and your feet to be effective, and Ronald Darby is the kind of guy who's got to feel confident in that to be successful. So I think they're going to err on the side of the caution. My best guess is he won't play on Monday night, but the positive news is he's getting awful close, and to expect him back the next week, I think that's very, very possible.
John, I know you guys can't watch more than about 10 minutes of practice, but afterwards, anybody get a chance to catch up with Darby or see how he looks? I mean, from the video and pictures that I saw from you and some of the other beat guys today, I mean, his picture was all over the place when you guys got a glimpse of him out there. I didn't see any brace or sleeve or anything that would indicate that he was coming off of an injury.
No, he looked good when he was out there, but again, there's a big difference from just stretching, running around a little bit in individual drills and playing in an NFL game. The locker room was open for about the first half hour. He was not in there, and then Carson Wentz went to the podium, so I had to leave. So there's a possibility he came in at that point, but I did not see him. He he's been in the locker room before while he was injured, and
right.
He was sort of on that scooter thing that you kind of have to move around when he had the cast on his ankle and everything of that nature. So he's not the kind of guy that ducks the media. He's getting very, very close. I'm sure he'll talk at some point this week if nobody got him today. But again, and I think if you look at Doug's comments on the matter in his press conference, you could tell they're going to be very, very cautious. And part of that, by the way, is the way guys like Patrick Robinson and Jalen Mills have played. I don't think they feel it's a necessity they have to get him out there. If, this team was 2-3 or 3-2, and this was a game they had to win, I think they might be pushing a little bit harder. But I don't think there's really a need to do that at this stage.
It's an interesting storyline because, as we said, it was 4 to 6 weeks. This would be the 6th week here. So you would anticipate that he is getting closer, as you indicated. You said the best guess is he won't play this week, but most likely next week, which then, how does that change things for Jim Schwartz? We've asked before about, how that maybe changes personnel, but what does Darby maybe allow them to do on defense that these other guys he can't do right now? So does he add something else to this defense, not in terms of personnel, but scheme?
Yeah, I mean, he's their best outside cornerback by a wide margin when he's healthy and playing at a high level. So all of a sudden, in the past, you've seen, with him down, you've seen Jalen Mills at times shadowing top-tier receivers. So in theory, you have the domino effect. That would be Ronald Darby, and all of a sudden Jalen Mills can concentrate on being the number 2 cornerback, and Patrick Robinson could play exclusively in the slot instead of starting outside and moving in the nickel. So it has a lot of effect, but you have to be careful, and particularly when you talk about Robinson, because he's playing so well I don't think there's any real desire to get him off the field at this stage, to be honest. So I think you have the luxury of waiting and making sure Darby's completely 100% healthy before you send him out there.
Yeah, and obviously, as John said and wrote about at 97.3 ESPN.com, he is back on the practice field, looked pretty good, and that 6-week timetable would be up this week, so we'll see what Ronald Darby will do. Doug Peterson did mention him today and said, we'll wait and see. He is on the injury report as limited participation in practice, along with Bo Allen, Timmy Jernigan, Jordan Hicks on that list as well. Any of those guys in danger for Monday night? Jernigan, Allen, Hicks?
It doesn't seem like they are. Tim Jernigan, for one, I mean, he looked completely healthy to me in the locker room. Bo has been dealing with the same foot issue, but he was able to play, so I don't think that'll be a problem. The one you kind of thought early in the week, because the Eagles were trying out linebackers, that maybe there was something more to Jordan Hicks' ankle injury, which he originally hurt against the Giants. So it's kind of been nagging, but Doug insisted he would be back in practice. Last week he was. Today, albeit in a limited fashion, and he seemed pretty confident that he was going to play on Monday night.
Hey, John, speaking of Jernigan and some of the other defensive linemen, there was a period of time in this town where if you said the name Wide Nine, people would freak out and say it's a bust and get away from that stuff. But Jim Schwartz has quietly used the Wide Nine to great effect.
Uses it all the time.
What's the difference? Is it the personnel? Is it Jim Schwartz understanding how to use the Wide Nine? Why is it working now when it was such a bust under Washburn?
Well, I don't necessarily think it was a bust. I mean, Jim Washburn, and actually Jim Schwartz will talk in reverence about Jim Washburn. He's regarded as one of the best defensive line coaches in the NFL for a long time. And I think the bigger issue there was the autonomy that sort of Andy Reid, that's when things kind of went astray with Andy Reid here. And it was almost like Jim Washburn had his own fiefdom and wasn't on the same page as Juan Castillo, who I think was the defensive coordinator at the time. And, you had a front four kind of freelancing and trying to get to the quarterback, and the back seven necessarily wasn't on the same page. So now you have somebody who's completely in charge, obviously, Jim Schwartz, and he uses the Wide Nine, and he uses it a lot. But there's a lot. I mean, first of all, the Wide Nine is not a defense. It's a scheme you use on the defensive line when the defensive ends are sort of pinning their ears back and going after the cornerback. Basically, every team in the NFL uses it at times. Third and long situations and something of that nature. And the Eagles use it more than most. So the fact that it became a dirty word, I think, was a combination of people who didn't exactly understand what it was, and also the fact that the Eagles were just a mess as far as leadership in the coaching aspect of that defense.
John, how about a guy like Chris Long? What has he brought to the locker room, the team off the field? I mean, of course, he's made in the news because he's donating his checks to charity and doing that, but it feels like sometimes he's an underrated part of the team's defensive success. What's your take on Chris Long so far and what they've been able to get out of him?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a guy who is a former number 2 overall pick. He's had a lot of success in this league. He's still a very good player in limited doses. I think maybe at this stage of his career he would get exposed if he had to be out there for the entire game. But when he's out there for the 20 or 25 snaps he is now, he's still a very, very effective player. It adds to that depth on the front four, which is the engine of this defense, the strength of this defense. And he's a part of it. And then the leadership aspect, as you mentioned, because the Eagles have lost a lot of leaders, if you think about it. But they've had guys step up. The latest one today being Chris Maragos, who's gone on injured reserve. I mean, he is the leader of their special teams. So that's another guy. But if you go back to Jordan Matthews and the trade, and just so many people were good in the locker room, and other guys have stepped up. Chris Long is one of those guys. I mean, he's a really, really good guy. He's a really nice guy. He gets along with everybody, and he leads by example, as evidenced by his actions.
John McMullen, our 97.3 ESPN Eagles insider and national columnist for FanRagSports.com, as we talk about the Eagles and their upcoming game against the Redskins. Monday Night Football. Long, by the way, has played 42.9% of the defensive snaps this season, so maybe on the field a little more than people thought. Now, you mentioned the name Chris Maragos, John. What's his impact going to be? Because he was such a heart and soul guy for the special teams, and today's the first day that we finally find out they're going to have to move forward without him.
Yeah, that's a big one. That's a big loss. And, you know, I always say the Eagles, the one constant on the Eagles really throughout the Chip Kelly regime and now into the Doug Peterson regime is they've been a top-tier special teams unit no matter what. And I think it starts with Dave Phipp, but also, you know, this is one of the few organizations that specifically has identified really, really good special teams players and signed them. Because other people kind of want players that are good for depth and hope they're good on special teams. You know, you probably don't want Chris Maragos playing safety, although he did against the New York Giants, and he acquitted himself at least okay. But on special teams, he's a star. He's one of the best players in this league. He's on every single unit, and it's going to be difficult to replace him. And Doug mentioned it's going to have to be a committee approach because one guy can't replace what he did on all those units.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen. John, you asked Doug Peterson today about managing the expectations outside of the building. 6 games in, it's a long season, but there's not too many outlets that are not putting the Eagles on some sort of pedestal right now. So how did Doug address that today with, you know, a young team, with a young quarterback, and quite frankly, a young second-year head coach?
Yeah, I mean, he admitted it's a big thing, and it's one of those things I think everybody kind of sweeps under the rug when they talk about coaching, and we always talk about X's and O's, and that's how I kind of framed the question, and the fact that managing personalities is at times a bigger deal than play calling or clock management or anything that happens on game day, and that's something you have to deal with. We saw it in Denver. With the first year, a rookie head coach, when the New York Giants were coming in, and not only were they winless, but they were banged up and didn't have any receivers, and Dominic Rodgers-Cromartie had just been suspended. They were a mess, and you could tell the Denver Broncos took them for granted, and the Giants went in there and beat them. And that's what can happen in this league if you start believing your press clippings or you start believing you're that much better than the opponent. And Doug is very in tune to that type of thing. And that's where I think his experience as a player on a number of good teams under a number of Hall of Fame quarterbacks helps, because he knows what it takes to win a Super Bowl. He's been in those types of locker rooms. And he understands the focus needs to be week to week, and you can't start looking ahead.
Hey, John, you also asked Doug Peterson today about Wendell Smallwood and whether or not he envisions him being back on Monday night and the role that he will regain when he's back. So how did he address Wendell's availability and role?
Well, he's another guy. You have to keep an eye on him in practice, because that knee swelling is something that could all of a sudden pop up again. So I think they're cautiously optimistic there. He looked very healthy to me in practice. He was bouncing around, seemed to be having fun. I think he's thrilled to be back. And I thought the Eagles were exposed a little bit in Charlotte as far as that third down role in the backfield. Kenyon Varner kind of held up for one game, but it didn't work out as well against the Panthers. And I think the Eagles really want Wendell back, and when he is back, and that's hopefully going to be on Monday night, he's going to be back in the same role, and that indicates he's probably going to get more reps than LeGarrette Blount. Not necessarily touch the ball more, but he's going to be in that third down role, and sometimes it's blitz pickup, sometimes it's going out as a receiver in the flat, but he's going to be thrown right back into that role.
John, let's look at some NFL stuff real quick. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, Eagles insider and national columnist, FanRag Sports NFL. He covers the league. You can follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen. Let's start with, obviously, there's a lot that's going on injury-wise around the league, as it always seems to do, and one of them is an injury. Mitchell fined $48,000 for that hit in the game last week. Were you surprised to see that happened with that play?
No, that was one that kind of I think everyone kind of knew he was going to be fined because of the way it happened from behind. So that was not that big of a surprise. It's tough. I always thought it's very difficult for defenders in this league and what they have to do and what they're asked to do. And sort of hold up, you're asked to play basically a million miles an hour and then all of a sudden stop on a dime. And sometimes that's more difficult than people can imagine. I think the bigger one everyone was kind of looking at was Anthony Barr because it was Aaron Rodgers. That to me, if he's fined, I would be surprised on because by all indications that was a pretty clean hit.
Yep, we had a couple of hits last week, including the Barr one, as you mentioned, that knocked out Aaron Rodgers. But he has not been fined. The irony there was he got injured later in that game, right?
Yeah, he got a concussion, so
right.
He's obviously in the concussion protocol, and that can be tricky, as we saw with Lane Johnson, especially on a short week. I believe, last I looked, he was still in the concussion protocol. So that's going to be an issue for Minnesota because that's one of the best linebackers in football.
How about the response from the NFL Referees Association today, responding to claims of officiating bias against the Eagles? They did not seem too thrilled that this has gotten to the level that it has.
Yeah, they weren't. And I get it. I wrote about that on FanRag Sports. There is no bias against the Eagles. That part I do think is laughable. But there is a bias against the road team when Pete Morelli officiates. And that part is real. And that part can be identified by statistics. And that's an issue. So, the problem with the Eagles is the last 4 games they've had Pete Morelli and his crew, they've been on the road. That's sort of the luck of the draw. The last time they had him at Lincoln Financial Field, I believe it was 2012, ironically against the Panthers, it was Carolina that got waxed and got over 100 yards in penalties. It's not the Eagles. You have an officiating crew that is obviously either intimidated by the environment they're in, or, I don't know, they want to feel the applause of the crowd, whatever. But the NFL has a Pete Morelli problem. It has nothing to do with the Philadelphia Eagles.
Hey, John, you got a story up on our website about Jake Elliott, the kicker. Of all the people that the league could try to pull aside for PED testing and drug testing, Jake Elliott is the guy they're pulling?
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you boom a 61-yard field goal. And you're 5'9" and 167 pounds. But, yeah, Jake put on Instagram he's been tested 3 times in 2 weeks. So that's kind of it's supposed to be random testing. It's supposed to be an anomaly. But that is a strange coincidence. And the fact that he's made 10 straight field goals, 3 of them over 50 yards, 1 the 61-yarder. Franchise record to win the game. I think the average has been over 46 yards for all his field goals. So it does, I said it before when the Eagles first signed him, he's such a small guy. You can picture he's Donnell Pumphrey's size, and the ball just jumps off his foot to the point, it's like a Sebastian Janikowski in his prime, but Seabass was 240 pounds.
Right.
And Jake is 5'9" and 165. So, hey, I think it's just an anomaly, but Jake certainly, his eyebrows were raised by it.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. As the Eagles and the Redskins get ready for Monday night, we'll have plenty more on the game Friday. And, of course, on Monday, John's pick for the game. And we'll have that for you here on 97.3 ESPN. John will be live at Lincoln Financial Field on Monday night. So follow him on Twitter at JFMcMullen for all the latest Eagles news and notes. Thank you, John.
Hey, thanks, guys.